Now, you're sure that's where that should be?
Yes, madam, it's just right.
Oh, isn't it exciting?
Indeed it is, madam. I've always heard of the Mandalay Ball, and now I'm really going to see one. Sure, there'll be no one there to touch you, madam.
Do you really think so? Now, where's my fan? Now, you're sure I look all right?
You look ever so beautiful.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Scott Faris, who is the CEO of ColdQuanta. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Scott, you've spent many years specializing in semiconductor and photonic technologies, as well as R&D and commercialization of some of these technologies. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. I actually started off my career, I've always been in deep tech. Started off my career on the investment side and then switched over to an operating portfolio company. And really from there, I've spent kind of a career in this area of trying to figure out how you take really great science and build commercial enterprises around those science opportunities. So I've done that in photonics, I've done that in semiconductor, battery and energy storage, self-driving, and now in quantum.
Well, I think that topic about commercialization, especially coming from academic and research, is really one of those things that's just a hard nut to crack. I know many have tried, and of course, we are starting to see a lot more deep tech-oriented startups, but it's just really tough to transition out. And I think there's a longer valley of death when it comes to these more scientific-oriented types of solutions.
Oh, absolutely. Most of these technologies have spent years in academic research labs, some of them in national labs, some of them in corporate labs, but there's a certain culture that gets built around the technology as it's evolving that isn't necessarily conducive to a commercial environment. So that's, I think, one of the unique challenges with commercializing technologies out of those institutions. Academic institutions in particular, which tend to run in very different timetables, different models of what success looks like, and to be able to take that and move that in the commercial world it's an art as much as it is a science, but it's an area that, again, I've focused in my career and have had a lot of success in it.
Well, I'm going to come back to that towards the end of it, because it's just so interesting, and certainly the insights, but the expertise that you built around that particular go-to-market is super valuable. I want to talk about your most recent work before coming to ColdQuanta. You were at Luminar Technologies that works with advanced sensor technologies. I wonder how that work there prepared you for what you're doing today at ColdQuanta.
Yeah, so Luminar was a really unique opportunity for me. I was able to get in the ground floor as one of the original employees of the company. Originally, the first, as they said, the first business guy in the business. We had really great research and scientific and visionary folks involved with the organization. And so to be able to take an opportunity like that and ultimately take it to a successful IPO and grow a global customer base of automotive customers was certainly an exciting challenge and opportunity, a profitable one as well. But for me, it really gave me a unique set of experiences and understanding how to grow a global company, how to grow a disruptive company. And again, I think what we were able to do is disrupt the sensor part of the autonomous vehicle space, and now disrupting the software part of the autonomous vehicle space, and do that by going up against not only other startups, but big established players, and being able to win out with the established players that were far better capitalized than we were, and really understanding how to use the size and the nimble nature of a small company to win against very large companies.
Well, I'm clearly starting to see why they've essentially recruited you to take on the CEO helm at ColdQuanta. But for those that are listening that are not familiar with the company, if you could give us a quick summary about this new company that you're leading.
Yeah, so ColdQuanta actually in the quantum space has been around for quite some time. It was started in 2007. So in the quantum commercial world, it's a rather mature company, but it's still a small company. The first phase of its existence was really focusing on doing quantum research for a lot of government agencies, and more recently, over the last 3-4 years, has moved into more commercial activities, and in particular, starting to focus on building a quantum computer.
Amazing. Now, there's a lot of exciting things happening around quantum computing, both from companies like IonQ going public, but also just general frothiness around venture capital. But there's also some warning signs around maybe getting too hot too fast before things are really ready for prime time. How would you address that question to those that are listening that feel that maybe it's not quite there yet?
Yeah, so I think what we're starting to see is really the commercial push for a lot of research that's been going on. There's a variety of modalities for quantum computing. You're starting to see those move into the marketplace. I would argue, though, that this is really similar to the evolution of the autonomous vehicle push that we've seen over the last couple of years, where a couple big players, a couple new big tech companies felt that there was an opportunity to kind of grab a leadership position. They wanted to define the future. I think that their interest in the amount of capital they invested in their internal businesses created a lot of confidence in outside investors that maybe this technology is reaching a point of maturity where you can start to see some commercial market applications. And so, again, the initial wave really was the big players, the Honeywells, IBM making investments. And now what you're starting to see is a lot of small companies enter the market space. And so I think where perhaps there is some criticism is that this is not an inexpensive place to play. Developing this is deep tech. This is hardware. So by nature, it's hard. And so I think, time will tell, but I think you'll start to see the number of the small entrants, I think, very quickly start to kind of sort out amongst themselves. I think you'll have a handful of smaller companies that are successful in raising capital to compete with the large companies. And I think ultimately my belief is I think the smaller companies with the more disruptive technologies will win this race.
Now, there's some interesting kind of dynamics that's very unique to quantum computing space, which is that traditionally, when a company is really ready for the public market, like say IPO or SPAC, generally their revenue is around 50, maybe even $100 million. But within quantum computing, we're starting to see much lower revenue just because, again, kind of like what you were talking about is transitioning towards that commercialization, transitioning towards that kind of larger scale enterprise. But there's a little bit of that transitional period, but the role of capital markets and why that's so important for quantum computing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the stage for what you see going on in quantum computing right now in this public market, particularly the SPAC market, really was set about 18 months ago, 24 months ago in the AV space. And a lot of the autonomous vehicle sensor companies and software companies don't have any revenues. And found a way to market. And I think what the capital markets were betting on was that some of those players would effectively be the winners in the marketplace. And so while they may not have near-term revenues, they were starting to line up relationships, develop applications, and put themselves in position that as the applications evolve, they would be the go-to partners to work with. And I think what makes that work is that the switching costs are high. And I see the same thing going on and really starting to understand quantum computing and how to leverage quantum computers. These are not ubiquitous. It takes a lot of specialized knowledge. And so once people start to pick partners, whether they're big companies or small companies, it's really difficult to switch horses midstream. And so I think that's what the capital markets are starting to see is that those companies that can get out and develop a user base, those user bases are going to have a stickiness to them. They're going to last for several years.
Actually, that's really interesting because, again, keep in mind the audience may not be very familiar with the general quantum mechanics, let alone quantum computing aspects. But within it, like you said, there's a lot of modalities and approaches. Let's talk specifically about ColdQuanta's approach of using cold neutral caesium atoms that's held side by side within a lattice of laser light. Can you elaborate, please? You may also like our quarterly Astor Perkins event that brings some of the most notable experts and category-leading startups in their area of sustainability and human survival on Earth and in space. To register, visit astorperkins.com/events.
Yeah, so our approach, a lot of the other quantum approaches rely on generating a quantum particle. They create their own quantum particles and trying to create the perfect particle, and then you build a system around that. With cold atom or neutral atom, it really comes at it from a different kind of point of view. We look to Mother Nature to provide the perfect atom that we can leverage, that's easy to read, it's easy to manage, it behaves in a predictable way. And most importantly, they all behave the same way, which is one of the challenges with other modalities. If you're trying to create your own quantum particle, you can't necessarily assure that all the particles you create are going to behave the same way. Mother Nature assures us that the particles that are created all behave in a uniform way. So what it really allows us to do is focus on building the system or the machine is able to capture those particles and manipulate and measure those particles in a reliable, but ultimately a scalable way.
Now, this point that you're making is incredibly important because neutral atoms that essentially have this kind of almost near absolute zero,
Right.
And gets into a hyperfine state. Is really critical because other approaches are using cryogenic and other means to bring down the temperature. And why is that such a issue when it comes to scaling and decoherence issues?
Well, absolutely. So we can create a micro environment around the atom that gets it to the temperature state that needs to be to behave again in a uniform and predictable way. Whereas other methodologies have to, create a whole ecosystem around it to do that. And so we can create very small devices this big that have literally millions of atoms in them that we can control and manipulate on an atom by atom basis and run that in an ambient environment. And that's really the crucial part of this is that inside the cell and using the lasers is where we create the ultra cool environment, but the rest of the system can run in a traditional data warehouse or any other kind of traditional ambient environment. What we're really leveraging to do that is tens and 20 year plus development in the laser world. And this ties back to my old business as well. A lot of the development that is resulting in autonomous vehicles has been because of evolutions in laser technology. And a lot of the evolution in laser technology and evolution in beam scanning technology that makes self-driving cars possible is also going to accelerate neutral cold atom computing platforms.
Yeah, that's exactly why I started with your background, because of your background in optics, laser, and of course you're talking about stereo beaming as well. This notion of trapping atoms with laser beams is quite interesting, and I think there's a specific language you guys use around quantum memory. And I think there was a recent article that came out on Nature around some interesting research as well as development around memory. Can you talk about what that means and what's the implication of that?
Yeah, so again, this goes back to kind of creating this hyperfine state of the atom. Again, the atom in its natural state behaves in a predictable way. And because we understand how it works in a model and we can create an environment around it, we can build scalable systems around those. And so, again, we'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, later about the first computer that we build, which will be a 100-qubit machine. But the same infrastructure to create a 100-qubit machine will scale to a 1,000-qubit machine and beyond. And again, what we're really leveraging is the predictable and consistent nature of those atoms and being able to translate that from atom to atom.
Now, in the IP patent world, how does it work? Because again, you're dealing with a natural resource, right? This neutron atom. So, how do you protect that from a method and process so that others can also use something similar?
Right. So again, we're not patenting the matter itself. That Mother Nature has provided us that, and that was obviously patented millions of years ago. So, but what we're really focusing on is how to capture, manage, manipulate, and measure the atoms, and do that in a systematic way. The idea of using certain classes or species of atoms to do that in a system using lasers is really the foundational IP that we've developed. And this goes back to work that's been going on in the national labs and academic research institutions going back 20, 30, 40 years in some instances.
Amazing. Now, you mentioned Hilbert, and I think this is your cloud-based quantum computing that's able to deliver 100 qubits And I believe is it already out, or it's going to be out later this year?
So it'll be out shortly, yes. So this is a development effort that we've been doing in conjunction with the University of Wisconsin, which has a development platform that we have there, and then our own dedicated machine that we're building and bringing online that's located in Boulder, Colorado.
Amazing. Now, you also mentioned from a product roadmap that maybe in, I think, 3 years or so, you guys are looking to exceed 1,000 qubits. What does that mean? What's the implication around the kind of framework and infrastructure and processes?
Sure. So for us, scaling is really not scaling the physical system any larger than it is. It's really scaling the number of atoms that we have in an array. And that's really scaling the laser and the beam steering aspects of the system. So it's a very small part of the subsystem and control system that scales. That's an important point. That's an engineering project. It's a fairly straightforward engineering project. I'm not saying that it's an easy engineering project. But again, there are tools and techniques that exist. There are tools and techniques that have been widely used in other industries that we can bring to bear here to give us a very predictable path on how we want to scale the number of qubits. Again, why scaling qubits is important. Again, more qubits is more computational capability, more speed, which allows you to solve ever increasingly more complex problem sets.
So when we talk about quantum computing, we look at it from dimensions of such as quality, scalability, for instance, and certainly stability in terms of decoherence aspects. What are some of the areas that's of biggest, let's say, R&D focus as you look to scale beyond 100 qubits?
Yeah, so a big area of focus is obviously quality. Having a lot of qubits around that are low quality, have low coherence, aren't really valuable. So it's really about, again, gaining better control over extended period of time of the atoms, being able to keep them parked in place over extended periods of time, be able to measure them more and more accurately over extended periods of time. And so again, I go back to, this is amazingly similar to the technical roadmap associated with LiDAR in the self-driving industry. You need to be able to see further, faster, and at higher degrees of resolution. And that's really what's going on inside of scaling the cold atom, neutral cold atom computer is just getting better control over the fidelity of management, measurement of the atoms themselves.
Now, ColdQuanta has been very fortunate to have worked with DARPA on some projects. Can you elaborate where you can? And why have they chosen ColdQuanta over other quantum computing outfits?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, as I mentioned earlier, ColdQuanta was formed in 2007. It was really formed initially to pursue federal government resources that weren't necessarily available to academic institutions. So these were SBIRs and other programs that were for small companies wanting to commercialize technology out of the labs, but also aim it at a specific challenge or problem that the government or the military might have. And so ColdQuanta has been in that business since 2007. We have a tremendous reputation in being a reliable partner for a multitude of government agencies in doing very fundamental quantum development, product development, not only in the computer space, but in the sensor space, but also really foundational work at the basic components. And so not only are we building computers, and not only do we do contract work for the government for quantum research, we also have a group that makes and sells some of the basic enabling components for making quantum sensors and quantum computers, not only in-house, but for some of our competitors and other research organizations around the world.
Actually, you hit on something that's very interesting. What it seems like ancillary could be actually contributing to some pretty sizable revenue down the road is that really to build some of these systems, oftentimes it requires almost like a proprietary approach. You can't just simply bolt on necessarily off-the-shelf things readily. So that's very interesting in terms of competency as well as a product kind of portfolio perspective. Don't forget to visit astorperkins.com to register for our next quarterly events. Past and current speakers include Damian Vaughn, former NFL player, Neil Gregory, Chief Thought Leadership Officer at the IFC World Bank, and many more. To register, visit astorperkins.com and click on Events.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to if you really want to build high performance systems, you will have to understand how to optimize the components. And so, again, what you see in any industry evolution, initially people start off by using off the shelf components that they can order from catalogs or other resources, and they demonstrate kind of proof of principle using off the shelf components. But in order to progress the engineering roadmap, you really have to understand the systematic view of how those components work together and what components that you need to innovate to improve the overall systematic view. Going back to our research focus, we've had the luxury of 12 years of understanding how to do component level innovation in quantum systems to make better quantum products and better quantum systems. This is something that we leverage ourselves for our own products, but it's also something that we work with other research centers and other companies to help improve their products as well. So we occupy a very unique and exciting part of the overall quantum ecosystem. And not only are we building the system level solutions, but we also build some of the critical components that others need to do the same.
So as I'm listening, I could really understand and appreciate why you've been appointed the new CEO, because of your ability to really look at it from a system view, but also at the subsystem and component level, but also really taking these academic and research lab oriented types of projects and then transitioning to commercialization, then scaling it. Yeah. So that's a really hard thing. And certainly when it comes to quantum computing, that is a major, major challenge. So in your new position, what are some of the top priorities for you?
So for us, a couple of priorities. One is really understanding the engineering roadmap associated with building more powerful computing platforms. And a lot of that goes back to the comment I just made, is really understanding where in the component ecosystem do we need to make selective investments to improve the fidelity and control of those components? Where can we partner with others that are doing work? As I said earlier, there's a lot of great work that's been going on in adjacent industries with laser and beam scanning and other parts of the optical ecosystem that we're well positioned to leverage. And again, from my vantage point, coming from the LiDAR industry and the self-driving industry, I have a sense of where those innovations are and be able to bring those into the organization. And I think the third piece, and probably the most important piece, is making sure that we have a pipeline of the best talent. I think the biggest challenge that the industry overall is going to face is that the overall talent pool is fairly small. This is the first time in a long time where being in physics at the intersection of a big commercial market has existed. And so the pipeline of folks that have the physics background that want to come into this world is fairly limited right now. So not only do we have an ecosystem building in terms of the technology, we have an educational system challenge associated with making sure we have a robust pipeline. And so we need to understand how we do that. We also need to understand where we can attract folks from other industries that bring experiences and multidisciplinary views to how to solve the problem. That's one of the things I've learned over the years in tech commercialization. A lot of this has to do, if you can build a multidisciplinary environment that, again, we may not be able to find the right solution in the area we're looking for it right now, but there may be folks in the medical and biology world that have analogous skill sets that we can put to work here, and they can help us understand not only how do we advance the core technology, but how do we advance some of these vertical market opportunities.
Yeah, actually, speaking of that topic, it's really interesting. One of the companies we're working with are physicists, and they specialize in nanoscale pulsating lasers. Yeah. It's interesting because they're applying it to life sciences, specifically stem cell. But it's those kind of interesting backgrounds that can be kind of retrained for this purpose as well.
Yeah, that's a great example right there, and that's actually one I'm going to go leverage now. So thank you.
Well, I know speaking with Worley at Strangeworks, that is what you just brought up around the labor pool and the need for these multidisciplinary skills labor set is going to become even more heightened, because you can't only have so many musical chairs before you run out of those kind of finite capabilities.
And actually, I think that goes back to one of your earlier questions about how many players can we have in this industry before we have kind of a really deep valley that we all have to cross. And I think one of the limiting factors is really is people. It's not necessarily capital. I think it's going to be finding enough really bright people that understand the nuances of this is going to limit the number of companies, as opposed to traditionally it's been a capital limitation.
That's very, very interesting. I want to come back full circle to where we first started the conversation around your background and your ability to consistently take these commercialization projects and turn them into real viable, sustaining companies. Can you think about either lessons learned in terms of things that may have failed, but things that have also succeeded? And what are some of the kind of secret insights or nuggets that others can think about when they're thinking about transitioning projects or technologies from academia and research?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing right off the top of my head is really the cultural aspect of it. Again, you're pulling a technology that ideally flourished in a very unique environment, a very unique culture, and you're putting it into a very foreign culture. And the steps to do that, because you're usually also bringing either the graduate students, you're maybe bringing some of the lead academic researchers into that organization. And again, commercial enterprises respond to very different stimulus than an academic enterprise. And so the first step is that initial culture shock of quote unquote living in the real world and dealing with a very different set of deliverables and time schedules. But assuming you're successful in that, you also have to set the company up to the culture is going to continually evolve. And this is one of the big lessons I learned with Luminar is that we were growing extremely rapidly. And the one thing that we had to be continually good at is reassessing ourselves, allowing our culture to evolve, allowing the people in the organization to evolve. And so that takes me to my second point, which is really the folks that often, and this is not an uncommon problem, but the folks that kind of start you off may not necessarily and usually are not the people that get you to the next stage and the subsequent stage. And so the company has to come to the realization that it's going to be continually upgrading the people and the skills and the talent in the organization. And often the technical founders don't necessarily come along the whole way. And that's probably the biggest challenge is that moment where the technical founder, who usually is a substantial shareholder in the company, has to make a decision of whether they want to continue to build value and maximize value as a shareholder. And when they understand that moment, they then have to ask themselves, are they the best person in the world for the role that they have? And more often than not, that's not the case. And usually there's a point where there's somebody out there that could take on that role and understand that role better. And so at that point, you have to make the tough decision as a founder. Do I move into a role that I'm better suited? Do I move out and go back to my passion and teach in some cases if it's an academic based spin out? And I've seen all of them. I've had founders that have gone back into the educational environment and taught. I've had founders that have moved into different roles in the organization where they've excelled and flourished. And I've had founders who have left in a huff. There's no predictable outcome with it other than I think you have to be true to yourself. You have to have intellectual honesty to, when you get to that point, make that determination of where you can create the most value in the business as a founder, particularly a technical founder.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of what you're saying is so difficult when you're actually in it to navigate it. It also mirrors the conversation that I have had with the company that specializes in motion planning and robotics. And it was almost like, one-to-one mapping what you're saying in terms of both from a culture, coming from academia to commercialization, private sector, to also transitioning the initial set of engineers or scientists to getting more production quality, different types of skill set. And so there's a lot of things, again, very difficult, very complex, and certainly there isn't a sure fit for everything.
Yeah, I say, there's not a one size fits all, but the problems are always the same regardless of the technology. That's the one thing I've always seen is there's never really been anything entirely unique in terms of the problems associated with doing the spinouts. Those are predictable. How you address them are unique in each environment because they're different people and there's emotions involved. And that's, I think, the emotional integrity is a really important part of going through this journey in a way that everyone feels good and makes money and is happy about it.
Well, that's a great note to finish. So with that, I have been joined by Scott Faris, who is the CEO of ColdQuanta. Thank you for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.